over as a little bit of background before we go into some specific enterprise concepts is the cloud service models. There's been a lot of work recently to define and be able to create a taxonomy for cloud service models, and I want to cover those briefly so we can understand what we speak of today. The first one is known as SaaS, that's software as a service. And in the software as a service cloud service model, you as the cloud consumer is able to use the provider's applications, but you don't have to be responsible for managing any infrastructure. So you're provided with an application that runs and you make use of that application, but you don't have to manage anything else. The provider manages the network, the servers, the operating system, the storage, and the application itself. The next model in the taxonomy is the platform as a service. In this model, the cloud provider affords you the opportunity to install your own applications onto a platform that they maintain. So in this case, you can see you would be responsible as the consumer for the application, but the cloud provider would manage the operating system, the servers, and the storage, as well as the networking. And the final cloud service model I'll discuss here is known as infrastructure as a service. And in this model, the cloud provider has the least responsibility, and you as a consumer have the most responsibility or flexibility, depending on how you choose to look at it. But in this model, the cloud service provider affords you as a consumer the opportunity to provision your own computing power, storage, and networks. This is typically provided by the cloud service provider through the extensive use of virtualization. So in this case, the cloud provider would likely manage the hypervisor environment, but you would be able as a consumer to spin up your own virtual machines. And once the virtual machines are built, you manage the operating system, you manage the networking they're connected to, you're responsible for the operating system patches and so on. Okay, now that we've talked about service models, let's talk just briefly about deployment models, and then we'll get into some enterprise considerations. So first, the model is the private cloud. In a private cloud, the infrastructure is dedicated to one organization. Now, a private cloud could be run by your own organization, or you could purchase private cloud services from a cloud provider. But the key point is the cloud is not, in this instance, shared. It's just for your organization. The second kind of a cloud deployment model would be a public cloud. And in a public cloud, it is an extensively shared infrastructure. It's typically accessed through the internet, and you have to understand this means that your data is essentially commingled with other people's data. It's a shared infrastructure. And the final model is a hybrid, which combines the features of both the private and the public. We'll talk briefly about some of the capabilities that cloud solutions bring to an enterprise. We talked already about the different platforms with the SaaS, the PaaS, and the IaaS platforms. A strong feature that cloud brings to the enterprise is the rapid deployment capability. When you're freed from having to worry about racking hardware, powering hardware, networking, you can deploy things very rapidly. Additionally, one of the key features of a cloud solution is the elasticity that the solution provides, meaning that you're able to grab more storage and more processing capability as you need it. So you have practically unlimited growth in that regard. And also, it's a global present solution. There are cloud providers all over the world, and their solutions are accessible from everywhere on the internet. Typically, with a cloud solution, you're going to get pre-configured administrative tools that make it easier for you to administer whichever particular service model you've committed to. And one of the things that's most attractive to most businesses in regard to the cloud solution is the predictable business model. You know what your costs are going to be. You're going to typically be paying for what you use, whether that's measured in processor time or storage, or in some cases a subscription model, depending on the specific service. It may be some other metric, but your costs are going to be well understood in advance. And another key feature of a cloud for an enterprise is that typically the offerings are very focused on their application. So if you want a cloud email, you're going to get a very feature-rich email. We'll talk briefly about some of the challenges that an enterprise can encounter when moving to looking at cloud solutions. One of the biggest and most fundamental challenges that enterprise consider when they look at cloud solutions is the loss of control to a third party. So essentially, you are handing over the maintenance and the security of that application or platform to a third party. And that's why security is the primary concern for enterprises. However, in its core, the security for cloud services really isn't that much different than securing in the enterprise. It's the same controls, it's the same security concepts. The technologies aren't fundamentally different from the fact whether it's in your data center or in someone else's data center. What is different is who's responsible for implementing the security, and even though you may have delegated the responsibility for implementing the security to the cloud provider, at the end of the day, it is still your data, so your enterprise still has responsibility for the security of it. So some things, other concepts to talk about for challenges. We talked about the loss of control. Also, let's talk about multi-tenancy. When we talked about the different models, we talked about a public, and it was a shared platform. Well, that's multi-tenancy. That means that there are multiple customers using the same underlying platform. That can be difficult for some enterprises to come to grips with, and really it comes down to having to have a firm understanding of what kind of data you're looking to put in the cloud, what are the security requirements for that data, and then understanding what the provider has to offer. Location is very important, not only in real estate, but also in cloud solutions. So it's important to understand that with a cloud solution, your data could be located almost anywhere around the world. So if the location of your data is important, if there are some laws or regulations to which your company is held to that you must follow, and that might have some impact about where the data is located, you'll want to discuss that with your cloud provider. Compliance requirements are another thing that enterprises struggle with. You'll need to understand what are the compliance program requirements for your data, and what does the cloud provider offer. Service level agreements. Again, since you are still responsible, but you're not implementing, you want to make sure that contractually the service level agreements that are part of the contract cover everything you need. It'll be very important to understand the definitions of the metrics, how you have access to the metrics, and what your recourse is in the event that the service provider does not meet the stated objectives. And in that regard, this is where we see a large push today in cloud consumers, is they're looking for greater transparency from cloud providers. They want a way to be able to understand, if we're talking about security, the controls that the provider is implementing, and also a way to be able to assess the state of those controls as to their implementation. So continuous monitoring is a technique that is being described as a way to possibly provide this greater transparency to consumers of the cloud.